Hello and welcome to this week's Top Gear. We're going to be spending a fair bit of time this evening talking about Japanese cars and their car industry. So we're at Swindon at the site of the latest Honda transplant. Transplant being the industry's current jargon word to describe a Japanese assembly plant overseas. On this site, Honda have already invested about £60 million in a new engine factory. They're in the process of injecting another £300 million to build an ultra-modern car assembly plant. So by any measurement, it's a big deal. Even so, it's just a tiny fraction of the total amount invested over the past 10 years overseas by the Japanese car industry, and the UK and the USA particularly. And now just about 1 in 4 cars built anywhere in the world carries a Japanese badge. But they've already earned themselves a reputation for being ruthlessly competitive. In motorsport, for example, so the saying goes, whatever Honda wants, Honda gets. In the States, they're already the #1 Japanese seller. Here in the UK, they've bought themselves a 20% slice of Rover. In fact, these Concertos are built at Longbridge. They come off the line with a Honda badge on. They come down here to Swindon for their pre-sale quality inspection. They expect within 4 years to have 100,000 new Honda cars rolling out of this plant here for sale in the UK and on the continent. And that's just the final lady, of course, in a wave of Japanese investment spread right across the UK.
Nissan were first. Their plant in Sunderland opened in 1986 and will produce 200,000 cars a year by 1993, employing 3,500 people. Its product, the Bluebird, is now superseded in Japan, but exports to continental Europe have already started, and a new Bluebird and Micra are promised. Toyota were next. They intend to make a replacement for this car, the Carina, at a plant in Derbyshire by the early 90s. Engines will come from another Toyota plant at Shotton on Deeside. Honda, however, chose a different route. They chose to collaborate with Rover. Rover gained new designs to adapt and build in their own plants. Honda had the security of a partner, and what was just as important, an assured market for their components. The engines from the plant here at Swindon currently supply the production line at Longbridge, where they go into the Concerto, as well as into some versions of the sister model, the new Rover 200. Eventually, of course, they will also supply Honda's own assembly plant here. But aren't the production volumes of around 100,000 cars a year rather small for a modern assembly plant? Have the Japanese revealed their entire hand?
They traditionally take a step-by-step approach. They put in a small investment, they make 100,000 cars, then they take another step and make it 200,000, then they make another plant, and eventually they produce something like 500,000 cars. And I think the same pattern will happen in the UK. But remember that the Japanese always like to understate what they're going to do. And therefore, if they say they're going to make 100,000 cars in Honda's plant in Swindon, then you can be quite assured that that is the absolute minimum.
Honda's track record in America shows what may be in store for Britain. Honda have 4 transplants there, away from the old industrial centres with all their deeply rooted problems. Already, American-built Hondas, like this Accord Coupe, are actually being exported back to Japan. The other Japanese companies too have American transplants, raising the Japanese share of the American market to fully 25%. Back in Europe, the new Japanese offensive is undoubtedly causing concern among the established European makers. There's a feeling that the British government has only welcomed the Japanese because of the relative weakness of Britain's domestic car industry. And if the degree of commonality between the new Honda Concerto and Rover 200 is anything to go by, could Rover lose its ability to develop independent designs?
I think increasingly Rover has to depend on Honda for its design and its development work. That doesn't mean that Rover won't have a contribution to make. It certainly will. But in order to compete effectively in the marketplace, it has to plug into the economies of scale of a larger manufacturer. And therefore, the Rover Group will increasingly be making Honda designs.
Rover might hotly dispute that, but the proof of the pudding perhaps is in the new Rover 200, which is launched this week. We test it in next week's programme.